Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate all the witnesses being here, especially our fellow Texan, Mr. Smith. Of course, you understand why this committee's jurisdiction is primarily based on federally owned land. To combat CWD will require support and cooperation of private landowners. But as you know, Texas doesn't have a substantial amount of federally owned land. We do have some national forests in my district. But I'd like to ask Mr. Smith, how have you facilitated cooperation among the local landowners in Texas?
Sure, yeah, thank you for that question, Congressman, and that's critical to our work on this issue. Simply, we can't engage in any kind of successful wildlife-based issue in our state without the cooperation and support of our landowner community. And so we have multiple advisory committees that advise our agency that are comprised of landowners that represent different parts of the state and different interests in wildlife. And so those include everything from a white-tailed deer advisory committee to a mule deer committee to a breeder user group. We have held multiple stakeholder meetings with interests from the ranching, wildlife, and captive cervid community. We maintain a chronic wasting disease task force that we co-host with the Animal Health Commission that's comprised of representatives, again, from the free-range wildlife interests, veterinarians, the breeder community, private landowners. We communicate very regularly with the state's largest landowner organizations that are very involved in wildlife issues, and by those I mean primarily the Texas Wildlife Association, Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, Texas Forestry Association, and so forth. And so it's a major priority for us, Congressman, and we've worked diligently to try to earn their support and trust in our work on this issue.
Yep. As far as I know, there haven't been any cases of CWD found on federal land in Texas, has
That's
there?
correct. Yes, sir.
So from the map, as I recall, we've got a small area in central Texas. It's under a watch or surveillance.
Yes, sir.
And a small area up in the Panhandle.
Yes, sir.
And then over toward El Paso.
That's correct.
Have you heard of any other potential areas in Texas other than those three small areas?
Yeah, very good question. So one of our real priorities has been very active surveillance across the test. So we have really increased our sampling efforts, really probably fivefold. From a free-range perspective, we'll collect and test upwards of 10,000 samples of deer on ranches, deer that are hunter-harvested, roadkill deer, and test those for chronic wasting disease. We also work with the captive cervid community to collect tests inside the breeder facilities to help, again, with an understanding of the distribution and prevalence across the state. Again, since 2012, with all of that surveillance, we have found it in those three areas, and clearly we want to keep them in those three areas.
Yeah, and just as a passing on a compliment from a while back after a hurricane knocked out much of the power in the southern part of my district, I was down there after midnight talking to the sheriff, and I said, the governor wants to know what you need. And he said, they've sent us some law enforcement. What we really need are game wardens. They can operate under any conditions, anywhere, anytime. If they could send us some game wardens, that would be invaluable. And a bunch of game wardens came, and it made all the difference there in Sabine County.
Thank you, Congressman.
You guys know how to work. Mr. Summers, let me ask you, the federal government's response to CWD is divided between Department of Agriculture's Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service and the Department of Interior's U.S. Geological Survey. From a state perspective, and given your experience, what can the federal government do better to coordinate its response with both of those agencies?
Yeah, I think it's a better understanding of what our real priorities are, understanding how this disease is being spread across the landscape and the role and responsibility that each one of those agencies play. We've got a strong working relationship with staff within USGS in terms of what expertise and knowledge from disease management perspective do they bring to the table. And so I think they play an important role there. And then recognizing the role of confined cervids and the potential movement of this disease across the landscape and how we all collectively work together to address those known sources of risk, I think is really critical.
Okay, thank you very much. My time's expired.